to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. My name is Mariana Cordier, and I am your host. I'm coming to you from my home via Zoom. Financial responsibility is tough for all of us, but it includes many aspects in our lives, some that we want to deal with as soon as we can, and some we'd rather ignore because it feels weird or difficult, particularly when we're talking about wills, we're talking about trusts and estates, we're talking about what do we do with our kids if we're not here, who do we trust with them, what do I leave my belongings to, and we got to make the plans. So those are questions that we're going to address today, but we're also going to address if you want to do a charitable contribution. Do you want to help out your favorite charity or nonprofit group that is dedicated to feeding the hungry or clothing the poor? And we're also going to talk about today the importance of knowing our financial status during the holidays so that we don't get too deep in credit card debt. We keep our credit in good standing and be able to pay our bills, or how to manage our debt. So my three guests today are here to help us with all of those issues. My first guest is Philip Karasik. He's an attorney and he works in the field of wills and estate planning. My second guest, and she's also co-producer on this show, is Grace Rivera Oven. She's the founder of County Consolidation Hub, and she's also got a great information for us about a holiday giving project and fundraiser. And my last guest is Saman Kadir Ahmed. She's an attorney. She works in business and financial law world, and she's going to give us some great tips. So thank you, all of you, for being here and joining me. And I'd like to start with Phil. Phil, I wanted to talk to you about the struggle people have about getting their wills together, getting their estate planning going, because nobody wants to think about being dead.
No, and thank you for having me on, Mariana. No, certainly it's not always the easiest conversation to have, and many people put it off. Many people start the process, they'll stop the process, they'll come back several months later. So it does require sometimes a little bit of poking and prodding from the practitioner to get people moving a little bit, because it is an uncomfortable conversation, and it's something that most of us are not really terribly comfortable talking about our mortality, and sort of what I like to collectively refer to is what are we going to do with our stuff when we die? And it certainly is a big reason why, as practitioners, it's important to be able to advise clients what their options are. And certainly,
and what I noted is just, there's a lot of things that you can't have done in a certain way, like with regard to what to spend on a funeral, or, what happens if you have kids, or what if you're alive, but you can't make decisions? Who's going to do them for you?
Absolutely. All of those are part of the estate planning process. Certainly when I meet with clients, we're discussing what I think a lot of people have heard of, these sort of common terms, whether it's a will, a power of attorney, a trust, an advance directive, which sometimes is called a living will. Those are the kind of the I guess go-to estate planning mechanisms that we generally talk to our clients about, and we explain the importance of each and why the need, and certainly why there's a need for post-death planning and pre-death. Certainly a will gets into the post-death. It gets into, where's my stuff going to go? Who's going to handle my estate? If I want to make a specific bequest to a charity, how do I accomplish that? If I want to give the red lamp in the corner of my house to my next door neighbor who's always been pining after it, and I want to make that gift, that you would do that in your will. Certainly, if you have minor children, it's very important to have a will in place so that you can express who would be the guardian of those children. If your spouse predeceases you, or if you're a single parent, you have the opportunity in a will to name and nominate people who will take charge of your children. So there's obviously very important post-death planning mechanisms that a will accomplishes.
And Phil, for those of us out there that are unsure or not knowing how to start the process, how would you recommend they start, or what information do they need to have to start?
Sure. I think personally, I try to keep things as straightforward and simple as possible. And I like to meet with people. Obviously, these days it's a little bit different. Certainly, sometimes it's remotely, sometimes it's in person with precautions. But that initial just consult of getting to know the client. I work in Kensington, so I work in kind of a small town area, and I like to keep it that way, which is let's meet, let's go over what your situation is. Certainly families have different situations and they have different complexities, different needs. So let's go over what your circumstances are. Obviously, we'd like to know, how many children you have, certainly the ages of those children. What kind of assets do you have? How are they titled? Certainly jointly titled assets if you're dealing with a husband and wife. Those things are outside of an estate, but do become part of an estate if a spouse predeceases. So we're trying to get a snapshot of what assets do these people have so that we can then direct them accordingly.
And Grace, I thank you for being on the show. And I know you wanted to comment on something, but after you do, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, because I know you're working for a nonprofit. You started to feed the hungry in Montgomery County. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. But what did you want to?
I just wanted to ask Phil just his advice on, we did our will when our children were young, and my baby just graduated from high school. So now, just wanted to ask, is there anything that we should change on our will, right? Because with time, things change. So any suggestions for us to go back and make some changes, and what would those changes you think might be?
Well, it's obviously a good question, and it will certainly depend somewhat on what your current will says, and then also depend on, as far as your children, what is your goal for them? Are you looking to really preserve assets for them? A lot of times within a will, we can actually create a trust that says, if I die and I want to get my assets to my child, but maybe they're not quite ready to handle responsibility. Maybe you'll put some restrictions. Maybe it's that the distribution goes to them in trust until they're 25, 30. I've seen it's going to the 50s sometimes, depending on the circumstances. Some things can be limited to education or just general needs. You really have a lot of options and flexibility. So, at sort of the stage that you all are at as a family, it's a good time to revisit and think, what do we want to accomplish here? Maybe if you have children that have a sort of a special talent, or maybe you want to set aside something that says, you know what, my child is really good in music, and I really want to make sure that they go to music school. And so those things can all be addressed as you revisit your will. And I always tell families, these are living documents that can be amended as you go forward. It's certainly important that you have a relationship with a practitioner to be comfortable to call up and say, hey, Phil, our circumstances have changed, and we really like to sit down with you and go over X, Y, and Z.
I really appreciate that. And then, there is the option also for the folks who can't afford an attorney, or they think that it's way too expensive. They still should look at, the forms that are, on the internet. I mean, they're somewhat helpful. I mean, I always think it's best to consult with a lawyer so you know your jurisdiction, but you still should have something.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly within my practice, I'm the beneficiary a lot of times of estates where there isn't a will, or there's a will that's maybe poorly drafted, and the court will at times remove the personal representative, the person assigned to handle the estate, and they'll bring me in, and it gets quite messy. So it really is important that you express your wishes, express them clearly. Yeah, absolutely. There are form wills out there. Certainly you have to be careful with them, because you want to make sure they comply with the jurisdiction, and that you are expressing your wishes within compliance of that jurisdiction's law.
So I know Grace hasn't asked it yet, and I know Simone wants to jump in, and we'll let her in a second, but can you leave a bequest or money to charity?
Absolutely. Certainly that's a very frequent question, and it's something that very frequently people are more than willing to do. What I will say when it comes to that is to be very specific.
Right.
Certainly seen circumstances where the name of the charity has been not quite accurate.
Mm.
I've actually been in court where two charities with very similar names have had to come up with a decision. Do we want to fight this, or are we just willing to agree, you know what, we can't tell who this was supposed to go to based on how it was drafted. So therefore, we're willing to split it. That was one result I had in a case, not too long ago. So, but
Okay.
the question, certainly, yes, it's a great place to do it.
All right. So Simone, what was it that you wanted to jump in and say?
Oh, I was going to say, I think a lot of people, at least in my age group, unlike Grace, I'm the other opposite of the spectrum. My children are really, really young, and we had to make these really, it was a really difficult decision, which we have kind of lagged on for the last 3 years. Like, oh, we'll get to it, because we didn't really want to talk about who we wanted to be the guardian of our children. And I was expected to go to the hospital for my second child. And that was when we were like, okay, we need to sit down and we need to just, you need to make a decision, at least for now. If you want to change it later, fine. But, put something down on paper. And we had to, and it was really the hardest thing that we had. It's really hard to just even put it down.
It's hard to contemplate. And then you kind of air out the family laundry of how much do you really trust your sister-in-law or your brother-in-law? It's like, well, not so much. They're great for partying, not for the kids.
It's also about accepting your mortality, right? And that's the other thing. We always think that we're always going to be around for our children, and we might not.
No, absolutely. And I think, the way I always describe it to younger families, with children that are toddler age, it's a safety net. It's a safety net for the worst case scenario. The hope and expectation is that you put something in place, you put it away as the kids age, as your circumstances age, you just revisit it. And again, hopefully you establish a good relationship with the practitioner. Maybe the practitioner checks in with you periodically to give you updates on the law if things change. But it's just good to establish that relationship so that you have the confidence to call and say, Phil, we had a third child, or that child's not named in the will. What do we need to do? So those are all frequent things that occur.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you giving us that information because it's so hard to talk about, and especially in a pandemic environment where lots of people don't have wills and you just don't know where that chips may fall with that. But talking about tough decisions and people coping, Grace, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what's going on with your the hub, the consolidation hub?
Sure. So we are in our 6th month. We started right at the beginning of COVID, at the end of March. We are located at Black Rock Center for the Arts. And myself, I'm helping to actually open other hubs around the county. So I'm happy to report now that we have, a hub in Aspen Hill, in White Oak, in Silver Spring, in Wheaton.
Now, for the audience that wants to say that there are no poor, hungry people in Montgomery County, what do you say?
Oh, no, it's unfortunately, the pandemic has proved us wrong in that term. But also, I think the pandemic has shown us holes in our community. We have communities that they have been suffering for a long time before the pandemic. I think the pandemic just brought them to light and they made them more visible. We do a lot of work in the trailer park community in Germantown. We serve over 220 families there every week. And we actually started COVID testing in that community as well with contact tracing because we know it's a very vulnerable community and there's very little social distancing that you can do in a trailer home. So that's part of our mission is not just to do the food distributions. So we do a lot of door-to-door food distributions with folks who are very vulnerable and either they're sick or they're older in the older spectrum, or they have cancer or diabetes, or simply they just don't have any transportation of any kind and they have children at home or are expecting a baby.
So Grace, to give us a kind of an idea of how many families you're serving, how many families are you serving?
Yeah, just to give you an idea, we started with 20 families and this week we surpassed 1,000 families.
That's a lot of families in need.
Mhm.
And the holidays are right around the corner. Is there anything, I mean,
Yes.
how do you guys get the things you need to provide to these families?
It's a partnership. We have created the whole concept of a hub is to create partners, private, public partners. Definitely, HHS and Montgomery County have become a very important partner, but we have partners like the Blair Foundation, even MANA and Nourish Now and others that serve the community. They're all actually our partners. And we are going to be actually taking the 20876 zip code for the Holiday Giving Program for Montgomery County to help them out in order to make sure that, because there's such a huge need, and that program really gets the referrals from agencies, from social service agencies, from Montgomery County Public Schools, from different other nonprofits who work with either transitional, home relocation for the homeless or domestic violence victims. So these are really the most needy families that we have.
So Grace, let me ask you, what is it that holiday giving initiative, what does it need? I mean, do you need anything from the community or is it provided just straight from the government?
Quite bluntly, we need funds in order to be able then to buy the things that you would need for a Thanksgiving basket per se, right? So if you multiply that by 1,000, we need quite a bit. So we are actually going to be providing for Thanksgiving chickens and to all our families, and then all the trimmings that go with that, and like a dessert and so on, just like the things that you would like to have at your own holiday Thanksgiving meal.
So the audience would be, if they weren't interested in participating or donating, how would they go about doing that?
They could actually, they could go to Black Rock Center for the Arts. They can go to the website, or they can send us an email at hub@blackrockcenter.org, and we can tell them exactly how to make their donation. The donation will be made to Black Rock Center for the Arts, and then the memo they can put Up County Hub. And we know also, like the Boy Scouts in Poolsville, they're doing a canned food drive for us, and that's amazing. So and then the Rotary Club in Gaithersburg is also one of our partners for holiday giving. So if you have an organization or somebody else, or your neighborhood, or even a school that would like to partner with us or with one of the other hubs, we certainly will put them in touch with them as well.
That's awesome. That's great. And Saman, that brings us perfectly to something that I wanted you to talk about with the audience about, we're entering into the holiday season. We want to buy food for family dinners and gatherings. We want to buy, gifts for the December Christmas holidays and the gift giving season and such. But we also have to keep in mind our finances. What are some of the tips and concerns that you want folks to keep in mind with the holidays coming?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mariana, for having me on. So, financial responsibility is probably the hardest thing to do during the holiday season because you want to buy great things. There's so much stuff coming your way. You're at home, you see a lot, and it's a very difficult time. I think families have always struggled with it historically. And at this point, this year, it's become even more pressing because, families are home, children are home. There's a greater need of doing everything within the community. But, I really want to remind people that now we're about 8 months into COVID or so. But going back to March, and we really think about everyone just kind of put a break on their lives and really thought about the basics and the importance of remaining on track. And really 2020 is all about surviving. And you have to get creative. You know, a lot of times, you know, you try making the gifts at home or thinking about how many gifts am I going to give, rather than, you know, every parent buying the child maybe 2 or 3 gifts or your parents' gifts. You think about what is the one thing that people, families, everyone in the family wants. And rather than doing multiple gifts, you're coming by way, everyone chip in together. That way that person gets one gift, but at least it's meaningful, it's useful, it's something that's also probably premeditating something you're going to have to buy in January, February anyways, because there's a direct use for it. The other opportunity is to do something of like a secret Santa. That way everyone is kind of tasked with finding one thing for one person. And also,
And I was going to ask you, you know, because what is the repercussion of the credit card debt or the, you know, not having to deal with debt in January?
Absolutely, because the reality is that we can't rely solely on our credit cards to go shopping, because anytime we go above 50% on our credit line, I mean, our credit interest rate shoots up to something over 20%, if not 27, 30%. And so one of the key things to really understand is that if you are going to use your credit card, make sure that you use a few of them. That way you don't take yourself above the 50% limit. And rather than not only are you trying to catch up on payments, but you're also trying to catch up on interest rate payments, because they don't automatically come down just because you go below 50. Those have to get renegotiated with your credit card company. And so you have to be very thoughtful about, when I take the credit card out, what am I using it for?
That is a really good tip. I don't think everyone knows that one.
Yeah. And so like, think about it. Okay, I'm going to buy my parents a jacket or something. All right, that jacket, if I don't have the money for it on my credit card, that you're paying 27% interest for that jacket. Is it really worth it?
Right. And what about, you know, so people are tough with work and income and what are some tips or strategies you would give people for planning out what their needs are going to be for the year?
Absolutely. Thinking of this, for the most part, if we think about even the holiday season, it's going to be a quiet season. People aren't really going back to their families because, you know, as they're saying the cases are going up, there probably is going to be a winter surge. We're already seeing one. And so, you know, traveling, most of the time, we're probably going to be mitigating travel. We're going to be, invest in things in which there's going to be a direct application of use. Or
so Phil, would that be get your will done?
I would say so.
Absolutely.
And then Grace is like, donate some gift cards to the hub.
I guide businesses through financial crises all the time. And that's something that I expected to get slow around COVID and when COVID hit, but I didn't realize how slammed I was. How are we going to get through the next 6 months? How are we going to contain our expenses? Our consumer everyday expenses? Are we spending so much money on eating out or extracurricular activities? If you're planning on having a heavy holiday season, then you need to rein those activities in. That way you kind of have to pay it forward. And it is the winter season. So a lot of stuff that we normally do during the winter months, it's mostly indoor. That stuff is for the most part going to be stepped back and stepped down. So you're not going to have those activities as though you're going to go to a play area or these sorts of things that you would normally have. Grace, you wanted to chime in?
Very quickly, I just wanted to say that we are seeing more an influx of families who have never, ever asked for any kind of help before. These are totally new families. They're not connected to any programs. So I think it's really important, that whole financial literacy, because it's so easy to order online with credit cards. And it just is, right? So when you're a young couple, I mean, you just go, you order Costco, you order Amazon, you order this, it all adds up. So, and I have seen families who have told me, and they're very embarrassed when they call us. And I want to tell people, don't be embarrassed. Everybody's having a hard time, that they already ran down their, you know, whatever savings they had. And now they don't have the safety net anymore. So
I would like to chime in is that even if you're doing fine during COVID, you don't know what your circumstances will be tomorrow, just like those families. And so rather than spending and having a normal Christmas, let's tighten our belts and actually focus on saving. It's an old school philosophy that I think our grandparents' generation got, but we've really moved away from it and living in the now. And it is a godsend. Even if you have, most families, middle class families, don't even have a month or 2 months worth of savings to survive on.
Yeah,
And
that's
if
a
somebody
point that
needs
I
it.
wanted. That was a point that I was really interested in having made, that a lot of families are lucky if they have 2 months of expenses saved. And at this point, they've probably blown through it, you know, whether it was the toilet paper gate or the fact that, you know, rent or the hours were reduced or furloughed or so. I really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing that information with the audience, because the holidays, I think, is all about plan, 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 and not just for the holidays, because we've got to get beyond the holidays and the rest of the year. So I really encourage everyone watching the show to consider making sure you have your wills done. If you don't have them done, update them if they have not been updated, and think about, you know, if you have minor children, who's going to be in charge of them and who's going to make the decisions for you. If you need help and you're not able to make them and you're in the hospital or whatever, and to think about the future, about charity, about giving. It is the season for giving, and our nonprofits and charitable organizations desperately need help, whether you're donating money, goods, clothing, whatever it may be. Please, if you have extra or it's kindly used, you know, donate it, and keep in mind your finances, everybody. I really think that if you plan it out, like Simone said, and you watch your debt, you'll be okay, and we'll all be okay. So I'd like to thank my guests for being on and sharing their expertise. I'd like to thank our audience for watching. I'd like to remind everybody, or our new audience, if anyone's just catching us, that we are on Channel 21, and we are also on the YouTube channel. To find us, it's Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow Show. Like us, share, tag, whatever the social media is to get the word out. But I'm Mariana Cordier, your host, and thank you so much for watching.